I think, as we will see today, welcome, to a redo of something probably should have happened a long time ago. A deliberative body like the Judiciary Committee commands respect, but only when it conducts itself in a respectable manner. And what we've seen in the last 5 months is their actions have put our influence at risk. In fact, no one on our side, and it's sort of crazy, no one on our side is questioning oversight ability of Congress. I have said it many times when we're in the majority, and I have in the minority. Oversight of Congress is a powerful tool and should be used. Article 2 is many times what I have found is members of Congress before I got here, he gave up a lot of our, the authority that we have in Article 1 to Article 2, and that's a problem. However, you use it in the right way. Oversight power is properly done as a powerful tool, but when it is not done, it actually weakens us. When you actually, as the chairman talked about subpoena power, you actually threaten the acting attorney general at the time with a subpoena and then had to back off. A subpoena was not used as a last resort. It was used as a threat and then backed off of. This is what we've seen so far in this Congress. We've talked about it last week. One of the reasons I believe we're having this hearing today is to come to talk about executive privilege and to talk about these things is because last week we showed in the contempt hearing that the majority actually did ask for 6E information. Actually asked for 6E information, which they cannot have without going to court. It's in the subpoena, and there's not a law professor sitting in front of me that wouldn't agree that the four corners of a subpoena is what the judge acts on, not the intent of the majority. So when we do this, we continue to downplay the role of this committee. Many of us were lawyers before we became politicians, and I was actually a lawyer and a pastor beforehand. Beloved professions in which reason matters. In which pride, when we come before us today in this matter, I'm glad that you're all here. I appreciate your backgrounds and your opinions, and we're going to hear this today. But again, I think we've come after the fact. We're now trying to go back and lay groundwork for what they may want to do later when this could have been done beforehand. We said this last week. You know, it is often said, and the chairman just said, that the Congress is a co-equal branch. I actually think it is the premier branch, because we're the ones that actually start the money. We're the ones that actually have control. We're the closest to the people. We're the ones that have enormous power. And the president does answer to Congress. With all its power to enact laws in enormous breadth, this committee's authority to remove a president and upending the entire election, that is the majority, has chosen to focus on. That's it. For the past month, the Democrats have focused on the few areas in which we are not given boundless prerogative. We know the danger of simple majority rule. We're not a country run by 51% majority. Without a division of centralized power, democracy becomes anarchy, and so the Supreme Court has power. The Attorney General has power, and even if he's not a member of your party, the President has power, which we recognized when Mr. Obama was in power. But for the past months, we have besmirched this body and failed to do our jobs. This committee is one of the most important bodies in Congress and has become a parody. With the results of the Mueller investigation did not satisfy the Democrats, they quickly started peddling to the American people the manufactured constitutional crisis. The majority turned a reasonable discussion of the Mueller report into an opening of cannon fire for the circus that they have created. And we're back at the circus again, and you've been brought into it. We have also looked at those who are channeling outrage for impeachment while then going on TV and saying we need to back off. It's a base perception political issue. We even have some that have actually on the other side become megaphone operators, roaring about evidence and nowhere to be found and demanding punitive action when they cry, "What's next?" Never mind the absurdity of what's next. For one example, the chairman claims that a subpoena is merely the beginning of a dialogue weeks after assuring our committee that a subpoena is a powerful and coercive tool and to be only used when our attempts to reach accommodation with the witnesses have been reached an impasse. That's what we actually heard last week. Not only is a subpoena the start of a dialogue, it's to give us better standing in court. Y'all, I mean, my law school didn't teach that. In fact, the judges that I went before actually believe the subpoena is a powerful tool, as the chairman said earlier this year. We're going very fast. You're here today to give cover. And they did so with no hearing, no groundwork when they held Mr. Barr in contempt. In fact, a mere 19 days had passed from the issuance of the subpoena and contempt. When the Oversight Committee had held Eric Holder in contempt, 255 days had passed, 13 times as fast. Now the Democrats tell us that they're taking the circus to court because the president has asserted executive privilege, a fact they claim represents a constitutional crisis. Today we'll discuss that debate and privilege. Many people claim Republicans on this committee are covering for the president when we should join the Democrats in their demand that the Attorney General violate the law, which is what the subpoena said. So instead of stripping our branch and our oversight authority, we actually believe that we have it. But I can't also let it pass because, Mr. Chairman, here we are again having this hearing, and again, I appreciate the witnesses coming and spending your time with us, but we have a crisis on our border. Even the New York Times, Washington Post, everybody else has talked about the crisis. We've not had anything about that. We've talked about DACA, but we've not talked about the crisis on the border. We have issues of intellectual property and trade on the front headlines of a deal with China. This is the Intellectual Property Committee. Have we done anything? No. We focused entirely on this one area. But the one that got me the most, frankly, as a son of a Georgia State Trooper, was This is Police Week. This is a time in which we honor our police officers and law enforcement in which they have come. 30,000 almost are in D.C. this week. And yesterday we had one bill on the floor. Bulletproof vest, great bill. I was a co-sponsor, original. One bill. In the past, we've averaged 9 to 10 addressing the issues and needs of our police officers. But what we did have from the chairman, and I ask unanimous consent that it be entered into the record, is a letter from the chairman and several of our members to General Barr wanting to talk about police-involved shootings and unarmed people in Ferguson, Baltimore, Cleveland, Chicago, Falcon Heights, Tulsa, Pittsburgh, and Dallas. And they list off statistics that in 2018, 992 people were shot and killed by police. No context, no thought about how many of those actually pulled a gun on an officer. No many of those actually were looking, unfortunately, what we have seen as a phenomenon of suicide by cop. We just throw numbers out there. Well, I'm going to throw a couple other numbers. 144 officers died in the line of duty. This year, over 86 have died in the line of duty. When one of the police organizations heard about this letter, this was their reaction. Well, that's a slap in the face. It's tone deaf. We could have waited a week. Then had this, nobody would have said a word. But in the middle of Police Week, Mr. Chairman, with everything this committee has going on, we'll have this hearing. I'm glad our witness is here. I'm glad your witness is here. Because we're having to get the cart before the horse again, trying to get it right for this one single-minded focus of hatred for a president and an attorney general. The oversight of this committee is unquestioned. We have oversight. We will work through that. But when we're hell-bent on finding an excuse to the point that we slap our officers in the face, I have no problem with looking into these issues. None at all. But when we put one bill on the floor and we send this to the Attorney General during Police Week, I don't think there's a person on the other side of this dais should say anything about supporting police this week. Just be quiet. Go on to the next week, and we'll get onto this letter then. And hopefully, Mr. Chairman, we'll take up something. As one of your members and I have talked on several occasions, maybe we'll get to some things that we can actually agree on. I've got no problem disagreeing with the other side on policy. What I do have a problem with is we never get to it. We're back at the same thing again and again. So for the folks here and our witnesses, and for both sides of the dais, welcome back to the circus. Another week is here, and we'll pop the popcorn while we continue to rehash the past. With that, I yield back.